Hello everyone. I warmly welcome everyone to the 2025-2026 Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Distinguished Lecture featuring our exceptional and inspiring colleague, Sussan Babaie, Professor of the Arts of Iran and Islam at the Courtauld Institute of Arts, University of London. Professor Babaie will speak on confronting revolutions in image making, historicism, and novel technologies in Persian painting. Professor Babaie, it is a great honor to welcome you to Tehran and to the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies. We thank you again for accepting our invitation and joining us in person.
Thank you.
I also thank Roshan Cultural Heritage Foundation, the Canadian Society for Iranian Studies, and the Iranian Studies Student Forum for sponsoring today's lecture. Lastly, I would like to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous peoples and acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto is situated. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place remains the home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, teach, and learn on their ancestral lands. My colleague, Professor Ruba Kanan, will introduce Professor Babaie and moderate today's session. Professor Kanan.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, and welcome, Sussan. It's a great pleasure to have you here at the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Distinguished Lecture of 2025-2026. I'd like to welcome you all to the third lecture of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies 2025 lecture series on Iranian art. And I would like to introduce our speaker today, who's Professor Sussan Babaie, who's a reader of the arts of Iran and Islam.
Professor.
Professor, well, explain reader to
the
North
British
American
system, yeah.
To the North American system, a reader is a professor. So Professor of Arts of Iran and Islam at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, UK, where she's been teaching on different aspects of imperialism and artistic patronage in the Persianate West since 2013. Our speaker is an inspiring and nurturing educator with many years of experience teaching at Smith College and the University of Michigan in the US, and as a visiting professor at the Institute für Kunstgeschichte at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich before joining the Courtauld Institute at 2013. And this is an inaugural position that you're the first one to occupy. Professor Babaie is also a distinguished and prolific author with many important publications to the study, contributions to the study of Safavid arts and architecture, with a list of books, edited volumes, and academic articles that is too long to list here. But I specifically want to highlight her important contributions to the study of the architecture and urban development of Isfahan, to her pioneering approach to the study of conviviality as an analytical framework to the early modern architecture and art in Safavid Iran, and more recently, her important contributions to the publication series The Idea of Iran, and her ongoing project on the arts of the Mongols. Please join me in welcoming Professor Babaie, whose talk for this afternoon is entitled Confronting Revolutions in Image Making, Historicism and Novel Technologies in Persian Painting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind and generous introduction. I want to thank Professor Tawakkoli for the invitation, and also thank Sophia Farokhi and Balal Hashmi for hosting me, helping me around, and all of you who have been whom I have seen over the past 2-3 days, I've been really privileged to see so many friends. Toronto turns out to be a real site of friendships that I began to put together slowly, and it has just grown further and further. I want to say that this is a research project in the making, if you will. So it has had iterations in the past, and it's continuing to have iterations, and is intended for publication in a substantive way. Now, how substantive it will be is a matter of future discussion. But I'm testing ideas and welcome any suggestions that you might have. And it is extending into the 19th century, which is, I have dabbled in 19th century in the past, but this is with a foot in the Safavid period. So it works on multiple levels in those terms. So let me start with a bit on historicism in my title. Historicism and historicity are often understood as the recognition that all human ideas and values are historically conditioned and are subject to change. That approach had been dominant in the 19th and 20th centuries, especially in the Western world. By Western, I don't mean to Euro-American world. We might as well be specific. A great deal has been written on the subject and its especially German roots and its development of historical thinking to become, I quote, scientific when it follows a definite rules which guarantee the possibility of testing its statements, end of quote. Its failures are traceable as well in its relativism and Eurocentric assumptions. There is, of course, more to the subject than I can handle here. For instance, the blurred boundaries embedded already in the association between historicism and historiographic approaches. Not everyone and not always are these two distinguished by scholars. Even confused as being one sometimes. Then there is the more recent, mainly American academic development known as New Historicism, which was championed by the literary theoretician and critic Stephen Greenblatt, which has inspired much of the work of historians in various fields, including art and architecture, since the 1980s. Where he posits that understanding a literary work, he's a literary historian, understanding a literary work requires considering the sociocultural, economic, and historical circumstances that shape the author and the reader alike. Interpretation then is subject to the particularity of the reader-viewer, if you will. So again, not strictly objective, but really complex and very useful. I felt very lucky, I still feel lucky, that when I was writing my dissertation, I discovered Greenblatt's work, and it really pushed my own thinking in new directions at the time. These are sometimes just lucky turns, as it were. Since there are students as well here, it's good to keep an eye out for what's going on around you, always. So this talk, it's more in a kind of a rumination, if you will, of than certainty. There's no certainty in this one. It takes historicism and historiography to the subject of Persian painting, or Persianate. Let's hang on to that one in parenthesis for later. Two general assumptions color our somewhat blurred understanding of the subject. And I still think it is quite blurred. It's not as clear-cut as we would like it to be. one tends to cast the historiography of Persian painting through an evolutionary lens. Styles growing one from the previous or another one, exemplified from the wild beginnings here, the Ilkhanid one, and I mean wild beginnings of painting, Persian painting, to the exuberance of the Timurid ones, to the maturity of the Safavid painting. So Timurid, Safavid, I just saw this page on Friday morning. It's extraordinary. That's my pilgrimage to Toronto, in addition to friends, of course. And finally into what is considered late Qajar decline, and then late Safavid decline leading into Qajar further decline. That's not my way of thinking, but it is in the historiography. The other approach tends to assign external forces to that evolutionary model of analysis. So Ilkhanid painting oftentimes is thought as being influenced, God forbid you ever use that word, to be under the influence of Chinese material, like, you know, a painting, a copy, late copy of a Tang Chinese painting, landscape painting, of which no painter in Tabriz of 14th century who would be responsible for that page of the great Mongol Shahnameh could have had access. But never mind that part. I completely believe the research that I've done that shows there is really no evidence for us to rely on that argument. It's either that or Safavid and post-Safavid decline being attributed to the encroachment of the European style. The sources of the evolutionary model are usually generated internally. Those of the patrons, artists, tastes coming through internally. The other ones, this kind, is always attributed externally, so it's coming from somewhere else. Neither formula has gone without critical reevaluation, but not enough of it. So we still work with these models of analysis. And I am, one of the major preoccupations of my research now is to rethink the Ilkhanid era and its innovations. That is a period of absolute innovation rather than imitation, as oftentimes creeps into research and writing. So the longevity of the historiographic narrative in books and exhibitions for general readership as much as the specialist demonstrates the ease with which such a teleological rationale keeps being seen as satisfactory enough. So we really haven't felt badly disturbed enough to really dismantle the model, as it were. Historicism, I couldn't help but put this one up for you, maybe. Historicism, and for you, in the arts of Islam or from the Islamicate world, that definition, articulated in a very broad sense of a conscious and intentional recourse to artistic forms and styles of earlier times, is often thought of through the insider track, if you will, which offers such examples as you see on the screen. The facade of the Cairo's Museum of Islamic Art, Mataf al-Fann al-Islami, of 1920 in its neo-Mamluk style, and Tehran's National Museum of Art, Iran Bastan, of 1937 in its neo-Sassanian style. Both represent that kind of intentional recourse to the past, but as it turns out, in most cases, they become anonymous or synonymous with the emergence of a notion of modernity generated by European interventions, oftentimes. It's a subject of great interest, but we can't get in there. Instead, I want to focus attention on this and offer some ways that I want to test that historiographic model by focusing on an especially restless moment in the history of Iran. This is when the camera has taken root by early 1850s, and the artists face a turning point. Artists who have been working with pen, paper, brushes, colors, even print, but not with camera. Will they survive the camera? This tension between drawing from the past to invent and revolutionize, I want to argue, eventually hopefully show fully, animates in fact a historicism that is more conceptual than literal, and offers an understanding not only dependent on recognizable visual sources where you pick things out, that's easy enough to do for anyone who looks carefully, but also of the authority of the poetics and the technological as the historical anchors towards explaining the innovative newness, or modernity, if you will. A Scene of Photography, which is a made-up title, by the way, it's just put on it. It's in Tbilisi in the Georgian National Museum. And I accidentally came across it a few years ago. And that set in motion this exercise, actually. It's a painting signed by Mirza Reza Tabrizi and dated to 1271 AH, 1854-55 CE. Painted in opaque watercolors on fine paper. I'm going to rehearse details, so please bear with me. You can see it or read it yourself, but there is a reason for me to do this, actually. It measures 176 by 102 millimeters. It's kind of small, smallish. It's affixed, the actual painting on paper is affixed onto a thick cardboard paper that measures 323 by 209 millimeters. 3 rows of ruled framing in colors and black lines demarcate the painting, which is itself framed on the top and bottom with blocks of calligraphy, writing essentially. This was, as it is, it should be obvious now, it was a collaged folio for an album, a muraqa, a well-established format. And muraqa acts like a mobile gallery oftentimes. We can think of it as that format with significant works of art by painters and calligraphers. This is an extraordinary painting dedicated entirely to the depiction of the act of photographing, a conceit of making a portrait of a portrait-making exercise. Mm-hmm. Scene of Photography and the small painting of photography that you see here, and this is the only other one I know of this group, which is a small watercolor, survives in a private collection without any indication of its context. That was published or is published in a context about photography when Harvard Museums had that photography exhibition. Whether it was for an album or not is not known. In this case, the sitter, who is the Shah, who was an avid photographer himself, probably because he recognized just how bad his drawing skills were, and his drawing skills were not good, poses looking outwards whilst the photographer kneels awkwardly behind this curtain with his camera and stand rather precariously positioned. Obviously, it's a very uncomfortable thing to do. The Shah was, as a Telegraph article in his time called him, he was photo-obsessed, posing for photographs, taking photographs of himself and the women in his inner court. He was famous for all of that. There are hundreds of these. A scene of photography was painted in the middle of the 19th century, only a couple of decades since the new technology was officially introduced in France in 1839 and had already arrived in Iran in the early 1840s. So it is no more than about a decade after photography has arrived already in Iran. New technologies and modern instructions of such sciences as chemistry formed key constituent parts of the new academy, the Dar al-Funun, which must be familiar with everyone here, which was itself inaugurated in 1851. In other words, the painting sits at that threshold into a deliberately imported and constructed apparatus of technological modernity, in quotes, and maybe modernity with a capital M. The mid-19th century Iran becomes especially productive of an analysis of the conceptual liminality of that transition. It's a really important time. What I want to follow further in this talk. That transition is visually represented in a myriad of examples, from the manuscript format at full text, in the case of the left-hand side example, which belongs to a complete anthology of the king's own poetry and his portraits in the style of painting still prevalent at the time before the arrival of photography, to single folios like the one on the right that were intended for albums, but now entirely informed by the photographic possibilities for the portraiture, or for portraiture. And just to illustrate the point, and only through the immediacy of images, this portrait of Muhammad Shah Qajar in the first half of 19th century, which is on the left, adheres to the convention of Persian portrait painting, with the regally attired Shah seated, very uncomfortably, I would say, on carpeted floor. Anyone of his age would have had knee problems. But it was not a photograph, it was a painting, so he wasn't posing, clearly. He's seated on carpeted floor of a palace porch and leans against some posh cushions. On the right, that same portrait idea is turned into a photographically inclined sort of formality, with the Shah now seated on a European-style chair, but in his royal accoutrements and accompanied with, again, epigraphic elements of an album folio. So this kind of a hybridity is really the issue here as well. I suspect the chair, which was known for much longer in Iran, we know also of two bejeweled throne chairs, one of which was a gift by the Armenian merchants of New Julfa to the Russian Tsar, and then following that, a second chair was made as a gift by Shah Abbas to the Russian Tsar. And interestingly, that chair, I mean, the understanding of the connection between a chair and authority becomes already visible and tangible in the Safavid period. And the Russian Tsarist chair, actually the one gifted by Safavid Shah Abbas the first, becomes the throne for the Tsarists until the collapse of the Romanovs. They would actually take it onto parades as the Tsar would go through the streets in later times. It's really an important little point of gifting with political edge. It's a subject that one of my PhD students is working on. The chair, a more efficient seat after all for photographic portraits, was perhaps more importantly associated with the trappings of kingship and its modernity in the Qajar era. There is a tendency to think that these chairs are European, and the idea is European. But the notions that develop already in the Safavid period around the chair and significance of it tell us that we should rethink such arguments. In any case, what's clear is that it was easier to sit motionless for long minutes on a chair than sink into cushions on the ground. And I think in many instances, like the one slide before, the stiff posture shows how uncomfortable it would have been if they had been photographed sitting on the ground. Now, unlike the images of the seated Shah I just showed a moment ago, where he has posed for a photograph after which the artist, in most cases the court painter, had rendered the portrait, a scene of photography is completely free from a photographic model, even though it depicts a scene of photography. It lacks the charm of those paintings a la photograph portraits. Those are charming, actually, but offers an extraordinarily intriguing visual proposition. The second man is in full, not the second, the seated man is in full regalia of the Iranian elite in the middle of the 19th century Qajar era. His high-profile hat and luxuriously embroidered and fur-lined coat signal his social status and the formality of the image that was to be made. Behind him hangs a blue curtain, providing a solid background where otherwise a brick wall would have been seen in the photograph. These curtains are common to studio photography, but here it is not. It's before studio photography that we see this being practiced. The setting is a courtyard with a wall of blind arches and sitting areas on the far end. The photographer, a young man in skull cap, holding in his left hand a watch, which is attached to a chain thrown over his neck, seems to be keeping time. He has the lens cover in his right hand while watching over his subject. The camera is secured on a flat top, probably screwed on so that it can be pivoted to change the angle of the lens. And itself, the camera is installed atop, or that sepaye is installed atop a tall, elegantly carved wooden stand. The sitter, photographer, and camera stand occupy the middle ground of the picture plane. A step down from the courtyard level, the tiled flooring continues with a second European chair on which rests the photographer's hat. You see his skull hat, but his hat is actually on the chair. Now rendered with attention to perspective and modeling of forms so as to alert the viewer to a source of light from the right-hand side, and with the cast shadows. Now trying to create something of a verisimilitude or a condition that is believable, if you will. All these representational strategies have been present in Persian painting since at least the 17th century, and often are associated in scholarship with a Europeanizing stand, an exotic novelty, than in the 19th century. Again, I'm insisting on us looking at the long sort of lineage, if you will, of these kinds of strategies in painting. The tall black hat of the photographer lies on a velvety green seat on the chair. To the left of the foreground appears a hawk. It's kind of strange, a hawk in chains sitting on a staff. Again, a marker, perhaps, of the sitter's station, maybe a princely figure. There are trappings of the status of the sitter all over. All this exuberance in seeing, picturing, provoking space and objects within it is disrupted. We are led to believe this is all real stuff. Then it's all disrupted by the insertion of text boxes. And this is very, very much how Persian painting has always done the job. So, on the rise of the courtyard platform, just in front of the chair, and below it, as if a piece of paper is lying on the floor, kind of a text image pictorial strategy, which is very well known from Persian manuscript painting and album paintings. Whilst the painting aims for quote unquote, and I mean it as in scare quotes, aims for realism in the Persian mode of representation, the text boxes turn attention to the very artifice of the whole exercise. It's a piece of paper, after all. Realism, of course, needs further unpacking the notion or aspects of verisimilitude in the European style, the so-called Farangi Sazi, even when it is attributed by way of here is a European thing and here is a Persian version of it. All of that needs to be rethought for us to be able to deal with photography as it arrives, but also with Persian painting in general. So going back to that piece of paper, one of the inscriptions embedded onto what might be seen as steps leading to the platform gives all this entangled portrait-making exercise an historically and culturally situated conceptual structure. This is where historicity comes about. So شبیه منصور خان در حالتی که دوربین عکس‌اندازی را گذاشته از عمل دیگاروتیپ عکس صورتش میاندازد فوتوگرافر فرنگی است 1271. This, the artist tells us, is the likeness شبیه of Mansur Khan, while در حالتی the photographic camera دوربین عکس‌اندازی is set up to take a photo, X, of his face, صورتش. In the daguerreotype method, دیگرتیپ. Photographer, عکاس, he also tells us, is foreign, is Farangi. And the work is dated. It's 1854-55. The second inscription, placed in a rectangular box below the first, contains the signature of the artist. It's written in black ink in a good hand, actually, with delicate curvilinear forms of the Nastaliq script against a deep green with a chain-like floral design. It's very well developed in the mode of calligraphic sort of insertions, if you will. So it does pose a challenge to colorblind people because they are greens and blues next to one another. The inscriptions, once you see it, reads, that inscription reads, رقم کمترین میرزا رضای تبریزی. The work of رقم, the humblest کمترین میرزا رضای تبریزی. Despite this being the age of portrait photography, there's no evidence for identifying the likenesses of any of the figures or the artist. The artist who paints the painting and the figures depicted. But we know that Mansur Khan, the elegantly dressed man whose photograph is being taken, was probably, I have just found some doubt about that, but was probably, this is a work of Shahriyar Adl I am relying on, Malik Mansur Mirza, who was either one of the numerous sons of Fath Ali Shah, they were prolific, or a son of Muzaffar Ali Shah. And there is some question around this. Adl's research tells us that the sitter in the painting had a photographer brother whose name was Malik Qasim Mirza, who took a daguerreotype of himself. This survived at his family's estate in Azerbaijan until its destruction, unbelievably, during the 78-79 revolution. There were riots. I actually happened to have been in Tabriz during some of those riots. When all of his photographic materials, I'm hoping against hope that this is not true, but Adl reports that all of the photographic materials, the unused silver-plated sheets of copper, and other daguerreotypes, and the camera itself were destroyed. Photography, then, was in the family. The artist Mirza Reza Tabrizi, on the other hand, is not known by any other works, although there is a suggestion by Yahya Zoka that he was an artist in the employ of that same Mansur Khan and Malik Qasim household, which is another line of inquiry to be pursued further. Regardless of these really intriguing tidbits, the painter was clearly familiar with and responsive to the family's photographic interests. That's the key point, that he knew about it and he was responsive to it. So back to the scene of photography, it's worth reminding us that this is an album folio and that fragments of poetry being added here and there on an album folio is very common, sometimes even illegible or packed too much of it on the same page. The poetic distichs or bait in Nastalir are from Rumi's Masnavi, which I assume everyone knows Rumi, of course, and it reads چون به معراج حقایق رفته بود بی بهارش غنچه ها نشکفته بود دم فرو خوردن نباید هر دمت تا نپوشد روی خود را از دمت. When he had gone up to the realities without his springtime, blossoms had not opened. Don't make it hide its face against your breath. Your breath must be suppressed at every moment. Since an album folio is composed of multiple pieces of paper, it is common for art historians to sort out and prioritize singling out the painting with a scene of some sort, and then taking the calligraphic separately, thinking of it as something else, not relevant, often dismissing it. If it doesn't directly say something about the painting, then it must be irrelevant to it. The first scholar to have published this folio considered the two couplets on top and bottom of the painting, but said that the poems written in Nastalir is sans rapport direct avec la miniature. There's just no connection with it. Others too, and there are only a very few people who have recognized this painting as a significant document for a discussion of photography in Iran, have literally left out the poetry. When I gave a talk on this painting to a group of researchers and students in Tehran on Zoom, they immediately asked, before I can even go further than just this kind of talking, they immediately asked, what about the Rumi poem? And I really owe it to my poetry-obsessed fellow Iranians for having pushed me in this direction. And I want to acknowledge, if you don't know, you should know Dr. Mahru Mousavi, who is a really fantastic scholar of Persian poetry and its relationship to painting and architecture as well. She helped me a lot to sort of unpack this. So at first glance, the poetic passage seems to only tangentially relate to the painting in that it invokes truth, haqayiq, or reality, while also referencing the breath as a veil covering the face. The two lines come from the long opening to the book 2 of Maulana Rumi's famous Masnavi Ma'navi, that monumental work on Sufi poetry. These are part of the long poem that opens this book of Masnavi, and as such remains the most famous of his poems, memorized by everyone, except for me, it seems. That these two couplets were deliberately chosen for the composition of this album folio should be considered of very high probability. The artist was working for the household of a powerful and wealthy Qajar family in Azerbaijan. The folio depicts a scene of photography with the patron as the sitter, and photography was an important family affair. That same brother of the sitter was an avid photographer and had offered the first recorded Persian photographic album to his nephew, the Qajar king Nasir-ed-Din Shah, in 1850. It's really tangled up with photography. In fact, he may no longer have been using daguerreotype. So to go back to how we go about this link between the poetic and the image, although the painting is striking for its representation of the proclivities of the new technology, it is the painter, the man with brush in hand, pigments and paper before him, and invisible to us, the viewers, who remains in control of picture making. And here lies the particular interest of this painting, for it encapsulates the pre-modern and pre-photography artist's understanding of what it means to depict a face, to produce a portrait or an image of a sitter. Even in a painting as cognizant of the techniques of naturalistic depiction of things, modeling with light and shade, gradations of pigment intensity, rendering of particularized observed details, wrinkles can be seen on the faces around the eyes. Despite all of that, the artist refrains from super-realism. The point is that an artistic choice and not the absence of a set of skills is to be underscored. This is contrary to oft-repeated assumption that Persian painters were unskilled in the art of mimetic representation. That, to me, is a total non-starter. And the project I'm following with the Mongol era paintings, where it's either Chinese or European, is leading me towards thinking about how inventive, actually, these observations of nature were. That Safavid painting in the Ilkhanid Museum is a great example of the observation of nature, in fact. Qajar paintings based on photographic images of sitters may vie for that sort of hyperrealism like the ones I showed earlier. But Persian painting, in its historically situated methods and means of visual persuasion, makes clear, this is about visual persuasion, but it makes clear that artists were capable, but doggedly refrained from, indeed actively negated, the full-scale trappings of realism in depiction. This is intentional, in other words, not because they didn't know how to do it. Nashmid the Archer by Reza Abbasi, dated 1622, and a self-consciously student after teacher emulation of the painting by Mu'in Musawwar, dated to 1670s, tests this inquiry. What does realism or verisimilitude have to do with portraiture? Reza Abbasi's is undoubtedly among the most striking of the single-figure paintings, of which the artist was a renowned master. Ignoring for the moment the inscribed caption, the idiosyncratic details of a crunched-up lower jaw, chin, mouth, nose, into what seems an exaggerated, of a funny face kind of a feature of Nashmi. He's a very particular type, obviously. And these touching details, bandaged ankle, sort of protruding tummy, all of this has been celebrated by modern scholars, but also must have been seen as physiognomically accurate enough for it to be understood in the time of Reza and then later that of his student as portraiture. That detail is clearly close, but it's not verisimilitude in a European model of it. While the persuasive pictorial details here evoke a real person, that is still not a veristic representation of the man's portraits. It's actually in the emulation by Mu'in Musawwar that we may find a confirmation of the validity of such anti-mimetic predilections to be received as true portraits. In other words, that was the point, not to be exact replication of the look of the person. That was the true portrait. And I'm getting to why. Mu'in's inscription claims that it was made after the artist teacher, unlike in the Reza model, where the caption calls it a surat, a face, visage, portrait of Nashmi. The Mu'in one claims itself to be a shabih, a likeness of the work of his late teacher. In this instance, it seems plausible to think that Reza painted a face while his student depicted the likeness of that face, that is a second-hand encounter with an already removed encounter with the person whose portrait is represented. What might have been the privilege of Reza's work, his knowing access to the subject, is relayed to Mu'in only through the likeness, portrait of Nashmi. That's how it works, actually. It's this how removed they may be. Subtle distinctions between a shabih and a surat may not be visible to us. I think we miss these distinctions. And despite a great deal of erudite ink that has been spilled on the subject, we are still unable to settle on a theory of portraiture in Persian painting. There is a question about whether we can even call it portraiture. This may be partly due to the fact that the designation, maybe Persianate painting, complicates the matter. I'm not going to go there, but that I have an issue with it, because then you put the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal all together in one basket, and then you fail to figure out which one is which, and European painting comes into the picture as well. Portraiture is particularly vulnerable as a theme in such a construct. We know Mughal love of nature, but that is not imitative either. But Safavids didn't follow the same path, as it were. So the early modern period presents us with some complications as to how to deal with this. A pioneering rethinking of this European-centered premise is actually Priscilla Soucek's seminal article on portraiture, where she offers something of a historiographic overview. Very, very important article on that one. But we still don't know how to go about this. Now then, returning to the pictorial evidence from late 16th into the 17th century Persian painting, I want to suggest that the implications of the theoretical, so convincingly analyzed by several of my colleagues, should be understood afresh in view of the pictures themselves. We know the terminology. We also need to know what the text-based principles of portraiture may have been encapsulated in the paintings. How and what might we learn from the complexly constructed relationships between Surat, Shabih, and Aks in Mirza Reza Tabrisi's painting, the painting I started with? Is Shabih or likeness the same as pictorial verisimilitude? In the Qajar painting, there should be no doubt that the artist painter is the source of the caption. He must be the one who put it in there because of that argument about how the poem relates to the painting in some ways. Well, I still have to argue for that. So he claims responsibility for the depiction of the shabi. He says that this is a shabi, or likeness of the sitter, while the foreigner, the Farangi photographer's task is to depict a duplicate, an echo, an ax, using the conjugated compound verb of ax andokhtan, a new construct as cameras and the technology of photography had just necessitated inventing a terminology. The artist tells us that the sitter, Mansur Khan, who is the main reason and patron perhaps for this image, is poised for the photographic camera, which is managed by the foreign photographer, to take a duplicate or photograph axe of his face. In other words, the camera is about to take a portrait photograph, and the artist, Mirza Reza Tabrizi, has recorded the image of the whole scene, but also for the purposes of depicting the likeness, shabih, of both the sitter and the photographer. Given that the 17th century artist Mu'in had set out to emulate the portrait of Nashmi by his teacher, could we consider shabih to convey not so much a veristic likeness, but an evocation of the likeness? A face not precisely the same, but capturing the spirit of the face or sitter. And what about terms such as surat, face, but also depiction, as derived from tasvir and tasavvur, imagination, and suratgari, painting, or chehre, face, visage, and chehre gosha, literally face opener, he who unveils the visage or appearance or aspect. All of these terminologies are encountered as Safavid writing about art, actually. So as a cultural construct with emotive fecundity, as Richard Brilliant and subsequently Priscilla Souček have suggested, portraits such as Nashmi's are closer to the idea of an evocation of the inner spirit of the subject, the shabih, than a portrait in the manner of lifelikeness. Sadeghi Beg, the artist and librarian of late 16th century Safavid court, claims, Shavam ma'ni talab as suye surat. I seek meaning through the face. Sadeghi Beg's treatise is in fact on the art of painting, but the division of the text into chapters, of which the beginning is about surat and the rest tend towards more practical and technical matters, indicates a privileging of the higher value of the art of depiction. Surat, temsal, chehre, shekl, manzar, shamayil, all terms that are utilized in his text, and all terms that vacillate between image, likeness, simulacrum, representation, parody, and so forth. The subtle variations on the meaning of a portrait may be teased out of the multiple and often interchangeable terms used to refer to paintings that can qualify as portraiture. So here, I'm getting to the end. Be patient. One more page. The Qajar painting of a scene of photography throws into sharp focus the potentiality for rethinking the early modern Persian modes of portrait painting as we are introduced to the very end of that phase. The Qajar painter, this is the one that helps go back in time and better understand the earlier ones. The Qajar painter sharpens the viewfinder onto the difference between a shabih, a likeness, and an ax, a simulation of the exact image, a duplicate. That portraiture assumes its meaning within the practices of Persian painting in the early modern age. And just to come full circle, it is Rumi's voice accompanying the painting on the album page that tells me, at least, where I should be going in rethinking that waning age of Persian painting. It's really the end of the line, and its predilection for portraiture. The composition of the sentence that tells us that this is the likeness of Mansur Khan, while the photographic camera is set up to take a photo of his face in the daguerreotype method, and the photographer is foreigner. This needs to be rethought. The poem text privileges first Mansur Khan, second the camera, third the Farangi photographer. This reading has to do with subject-verb construct of the sentence as well, which has no object actually. It has two fa'il, no maf'ul in fact. The agency then is not in the hand of the photographer, who remains nameless, is mentioned last in the sentence, rather, and he's a pretty boy. He's a pretty Farangi. The agency is not in the camera either, as the artist speaks. He distinguishes himself as the singularly important actor here, standing apart from the rest. We understand where he's standing. He evokes that. The intentionality of the choices of wording, but also, and more compellingly, of the poetic lines of Rumi make it even more clear that the photograph or axe is the reality, whilst painting is the analytical interpretation of that reality. Was photography then understood as realism? That's a question remaining in my mind. In the opening of Masnavi, Rumi was recounting how he waited 2 years before he finally submitted to the encouragements of his beloved, his student, Hosam-ed-Din, and composed Masnavi. His opening lines further encouraged the lover to remain silent in the presence of the beloved, so as to find purity of soul, khulus, and means of access to the beloved. In the second verse, he further encourages his reader to assume silence. Your breath must be suppressed at every moment, so he advises. One must stay absolutely still. If, he says, you breathe and move, your breath changes the real. Hence the picture that the camera is taking will be out of focus, hides behind the qajar, or the breath. In the end, the artist and persons who composed the folio point to something that must have generated a philosophical debate at the time when photography begins to take over. The photographer and his tools are unable to capture the true picture. Only the painter can make that truth visible through his tools: paint, brush, pigments, paper. As such, the subjectivity of the painter in this case dominates the work, whilst the artist openly and unabashedly dismisses the subjectivity of the photographer. That young European dandy is worth nothing. To further complicate Rumi's presence here, the whole can be interpreted as an entanglement with materiality. The picture has materiality, but to the mystic, the poetic is always immaterial. He, Rumi, and all who seek the truth must enter the realm of materiality in order to access the mystical. In poetic terms, then, the picture is only the skin, but capable of, and indeed instrumental in giving access to what lies beneath. The privilege of the artist over the poet is that he has access to the material through which he can evoke the inner core of those he depicts. But to the poet, Rumi tells us, the skin remains transparent, inaccessible. For the most phenomenological poet of the age, Rumi, it was through performance, movement, sound, the sama, that the seeker could get to the core, to go beyond the textual, to access the feeling of things. And there lies the significant role visual arts could play in this instance. This was indeed an anxious moment of history when the camera had already taken root in Iran. And here the artists as in painterly tools take, it seems to me, one last chance to ponder what exactly lies ahead. It seems also that the question of will they survive the camera and the photographer is already a lost case. In this extraordinary instance, the artist and composer of the album page summoned Rumi, I think, and his conceptions of the real, the skin, the inner core, and the necessity of having access to the skin to penetrate into the core, to convey something of the superiority of the act of painting over replicating with the camera. Shabih and Aks binary come into play here. He loses it, of course. The artist's subtle act of resistance as he and his collaborators ingeniously summoned Rumi to frame the contest is, as I have suggested here, I hope, not between tradition and modernity, but as a profoundly philosophical debate between the authentic self and its reflection, its duplicate. While history shows us that the painter lost that contest to the photographer, it's now incumbent, at least I feel the pressure personally, to revisit the earlier arguments about complexly constructed debates around portraiture and what that means in Persian painting, and around the subject of modernity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sussan. This has been wonderful. It really makes you think. And I think it's fair to say that the painting, there's no better expression to say, boggles the mind. Because it has this perceptual dissonance between, are we looking at a painting? Are we looking at a photography scene? Are we looking, it all the time when I saw it and when you were talking about the philosophical debate it brings up, I was thinking of Magritte's series of human condition, and especially the painting in the National Art in Washington, the one where he has a painting with a window, and with the window you're looking outside, but there's an easel and someone is painting the nature outside. And this play, this perceptual play, there is intentional to raise the question of perception and the human mind and so on. Whereas here, there is the added complexity of not only the inscription and the play on the words Shabih and Aks, but also this sort of this historicity that takes it back to the 17th century. I think it's an incredibly rich painting, and thank you so much for bringing it to us.
Thank you very much.
I would like to open the ground for the floor for questions, both here and online.
Just noting, it also embodies a double consciousness.
Yes.
The consciousness of photographer and the painter, and in a sense, is itself a documentary work of art.
You're right. Except that I want to ask, photographer is sort of, consciousness of the photographer is not given room here, as it were.
Yeah, but it depicts it. It depicts it rather accurately, one could say.
But I think that's the point, that it depicts it, but it's not the subject. It's not the topic in a sense. There's a distance. There's prioritizing the painting and the painter. So there's an incredible play. It's almost a point of discussion.
Reporting on the artistic other already photographer has become the other that you are depicting here
And at a
to
very
critique.
early date. It's
It's brilliant.
It's brilliant. I mean, the way the artist actually is obviously very anxious moment.
Yes.
The anxiety about, my God, they are here. They take the picture of the guy and he looks just like him. How am I going to do this, you know? But the point is that I think they can do it. They have always been able to do it. But that's not the goal of painting. So you don't want to depict a face
essence
based on, you have to go deeper or use that skin to enter the core kind of a thing.
That was wishful thinking on the case of the portrait painter.
Well, he lost it clearly, but he has to try one last time.
I'm really intrigued by the hawk, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So my question is it hooded or not?
It must be. I can't see.
And the reason I'm asking is because are those like the little
No,
bird?
he's not hooded.
If
Look
it's
at
not
him.
hooded and there's that bird that's just outside of his, is that a bird or is that a
Where,
scratch?
this?
On the top left, is that some kind of
Here?
That's a scratch.
right above the hawk? Is that a rendering of
All the way up?
yeah? So right to the just left of the hawk's head. Is that
Just
like
That
a
one is a
basement?
damage on the
It's
painting.
just
It's just damage.
So if the hawk isn't hooded, that's actually quite interesting, because they're typically hooded when they're on their stand, and the stillness of an unhooded hawk. Does that say anything or dovetail with the poetry and the stillness of the breath? Like, I'm seeing something quite fascinating.
So
about-
what you're bringing up, which is really worth pursuing further, is this front part of the painting, where you step down. There is a sense that this ground
where the
is
paint is.
different.
The foundation.
Yeah, this is a
the
different
reality.
ground.
This is the reality.
Right. And the chair is really weird too. I once, when I gave a version of this, someone who is an artist who works with photographic means said that chair is so weird, and you know, the eye of a photographer sees the chair as something very problematic.
Yeah, and like hawks and vision.
Yeah.
So there's something about the sharpness of the eye of
Yeah.
the hawk that can see things that other creatures can't.
Yeah.
And is there any, is the artist trying to say something? With
That
this?
is this whole segment with what's on it. Why do you have this hawk there? Why is this chair in that
Yeah, it's
manner,
very mysterious.
standing that way? The hawk is seen in profile. Those, to me, it seems like there is a realm. These are two different realms.
I think the hawk is sort of projecting into the future and seeing Sussan Babaie reflecting on the poem.
And I think there's almost this sort of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I have one thing to add about the hawk. We have photographs of hawks on stands and on the hands of their trainers without any kind of protection. So this might not have been that uncommon.
Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
the
That's
tape.
true.
No, I'm not at all worried about the hawk being without
No,
it.
it was a question that.
But it is an important feature which I have no idea what to say yet.
Third vision.
But also the positioning, where you have these two layers, and you have the parallel between the hawk and one can build it this way, the
Yeah.
hawk and the photographer. Then you have the camera and the inscription of the painter's name, and then you have the two chairs, one empty and one full. I don't know if one can make something out of it, but there are things to question in this.
Yeah. And the, yes, please.
Area, but I was thinking maybe is there any point to think of how the hawk is looking at the one who's sitting?
The hawk is seen in this profile and seems to be looking straight that way.
It's not in parallel.
Yeah, you can tell that it's looking at something. Please.
Thank you very much for such informative session. Like yesterday's, so igniting the imagination.
Thank you.
Transports you to,
This is fun of life, you know. Some of us really
yeah, absolutely.
enjoy this kind of
That's
thing.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Perhaps here, going through the arts history of European tradition, it becomes so you get used to going from one period to another.
Yeah.
The medieval arts to Renaissance, low, high,
Yeah.
Renaissance, and all the way down. In here, your focus is on Safavid and Qajar mainly, but I can't help it. Actually, I just wanted to ask you about that because the pre-visual arts, pre-Safavid period, we have the amazing work of art during the as you mentioned, Ilkhanid. It's hard to track any of those, evolutionary or development of those kind of arts. It seems like, to me, I'm not an expert in this, but there is a gap, drop, or I was trying to find a word for that, a rupture, probably, from pre-Safavid to Safavid and beyond, because there are so many. Sorry, I say that.
No, please.
Probably we are talking about all these.
You're opening
imperfections,
a Pandora's box. Go ahead, please.
So the imperfections in painting of Safavid and beyond, and when you compare it with before that, during the Ilkhanid, the miniatures and the essars and all those, so detailed work of visual art. I just wanted to see if you go through those probably Western tradition of evolution of arts, right? How do we detect that evolutionary pattern here? Especially in these pics that you have, amazing, arts of, revealing so much from that period. But I'm wondering if
You don't like this stuff.
I do actually, and especially about that eagle and all. My question is so connected. I make it very short, but would bringing the Rumi's beautiful poetries and also some objects like that eagle and some other characters, it's like a coupage, bringing in some other characters and information, perhaps from my limited knowledge, would it be a way to add additional value or to get away from those imperfections?
This is a big story, and I'm afraid it is a Pandora's box, in that obviously you don't like anything that comes late in Safavid period. So, as you mentioned, miniature paintings, that is considered, that's a very European narrative of Persian painting, where painting was highly valued by collectors, Orientalists primarily, when it was considered to be classical Persian painting. So manuscripts of Shahnameh, Nizamis and Attar and so forth that were illustrated for courtly patrons in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries were considered the height of Persian painting, starting actually with a lesser versions, if you will, and rising to a height like Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp. Then scholarship has almost without shame called it a decline when it comes to the Safavid period, and attributed that decline to the arrival of European painting. In other words, the assumption is that European art arrives into Safavid Iran, and then it corrupts whatever it was there. and it declines. And then we go from there all the way to modern times. There are modern time students who write to me and say, I want to talk about the influence of European art and how grand Persian painting becomes or falls or whatever the case is. The point is that narrative is teleological. It looks from now, looks back, and responds to the likes and dislikes of a very narrowly defined group, primarily collectors, who thought that those are the greatest and the exemplars of Persian painting, whereas the subject has the right to have its own historical development. Doesn't have to be what the European thinks is the high or the low. That would be my short answer for that. Sorry about that. I see, and I see.
Okay, so I just want to take us back a few centuries and what your discussion, wonderful discussion and fantastic painting, reminded me of, and that's Nizami's story of the Chinese painter
Right.
and the Greek painter and the contest.
Right.
And who ends up being the superior? The one who doesn't
Do anything.
do any mimetic
Right.
representation.
Exactly.
So this is a kind of a, I think it's always there, this feeling that there is a spiritual activity and behavior involved in creating a painting.
Yeah.
And that all through Islamic painting, they always have the capability to do something mimetic if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And they also began to see in paintings something that we wouldn't consider mimetic, but they say, oh, Pensab do beards. You know, it's so, it just depends on your standpoint. But I like the story of Nizami.
Yeah.
Because it links,
Yeah, that's the one that Priscilla has done a really good study of it and shows how Nizami's understanding of it and explanation for it is exactly as you say. It's not valuing mimetic approach, but the one that actually complicates and gets you into the core, under the skin, so to speak. And that's an important part of the discussion. Thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. Thank you. Shabnam.
I was going to say
She covered it.
She covered it.
Much more brilliantly than I would have been able to.
Are you
but-
sure, Shabnam?
I mean, the point of technique, the point of having details or a particular version of detail or a particular surface skin quality that determined the value of the things that came into market from early Safavid period and then were cut off from their original books or poetry had also very much to do with the fact that nobody can read. None of the people who were collecting were either interested or able to read the poems and see the connection between the word and the kind of the philosophical storytelling web of association that comes from page before, page after, the bait on top, on the bottom, and kind of constructed the structure around this painting that went beyond the technique, went beyond what is translucent and what is not covered, and why is it the perspective is not correct.
Yeah, you make a really good point that is worth underscoring. The classical Persian painting, which is highly valued and prized, is that of the manuscript. And you can tell this is the story of Bahram Gur and the princesses, and that's how the paintings relate to the stories. Whereas when we get to these late 16th and into the 17th century album paintings, which is really a revolutionary, explosive mode of representation, and it's available to a wider audience, it comes without those texts. And the scholarship that was familiar with the texts, classical texts, is no longer reading these. They are not important anymore. And so that separation leads to all kinds of misrepresentations of the value of the works. exactly.
Can I just add
Yeah.
very quickly here on that point, is we can add to what Shabnam is saying, is that here there is the immediacy and I think actually the lure of having the camera. We immediately think of it as a documentary image and we're looking at it with that eye. It supersedes then the text in a sense and makes someone who's not interested in analyzing the painting altogether to forget about the text itself. So there is that aspect of immediacy, aspect of the documentary evidence of it,
So
which is real,
can
but
I-
also there's more.
Can I ask both of you, when you say documentary nature, this is not what they
No.
saw. This is what we saw.
Yeah.
See.
Yeah. It's a-
But
We
It's
look
a
at this and
Greek
say, oh,
thing.
it has cameras, therefore it is
But
documentary.
linking it to something else that you talked about yesterday, but the public sphere, public sociability and discussion and conversation, the combination of the Akkas and the portrait painter and Rumi creates a public sphere and public discussion and public conversation and sort of opens up a debate about these two. So in a sense,
That's-
taking it public
Yeah.
is not just between the painter and, but
Yeah.
it also by bringing Rumi in, it introduces into
Becomes
public
a more-
debate.
Yeah. I actually, that whole thing
And be
about
able
the
to document this textually, sort of bring it into the
it's-
making of this.
Yeah, it's interesting because that philosophical debate must have been a big deal, which we don't know enough about, which then implies that there was a public sphere for this
Definitely.
philosophical
Yeah.
debate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mujan, my fellow Mongolian.
This was very interesting, Paul. Thank you so much. It's more of a comment, I guess, and then followed by a question, and looking at a slightly different medium. So, Qajar tiles, there are portraits, sort of photographic style, and in the sort of second half of 19th century, there's this very peculiar dark green pigment. It's a chromium compound, never seen before, and it can actually be used as a chronological criterion. And you know, of course, there's a view that it came from Europe, it was a European pigment, and when you look closely, it was never used in Europe as a pigment. But it was used for printing photographs. this compound.
So as from photography goes into tile making.
And I like your mention of novel technologies in Persian painting. Now, I'm not familiar with paintings at all, but this color palette, is there anything specific to this
Of
period?
this color,
Is it, yes,
yeah.
Is it new to you, coming to your eyes?
You know, it's possible to find Qajar paintings of this. This is fairly, you know, mid-19th century. It precedes some of those that you're probably talking about. I'm not quite sure, but
Starts exactly sort of early,
Yeah.
second half of 19th century.
yeah. So I like that, you know, looking at the color palette to see if the palette means it also has something to do with the material. I mean, how was it used in photography? I mean, that green?
Sort of, it created a layer, and then when it was exposed to light.
So it is the base layer.
Yes.
And they used it on tiles?
So it is a very similar compound, but nobody's actually looked into that. But it's not known as a ceramic pigment
Yeah.
in Iran. Or
It's not anywhere else either, right? Yeah. So I'm going to now have to look at the palette.
Of this and around the 19th century.
Yeah, the palette. I'll ask you again for some, if you can send me like an image that would help me see if this has, is it on tiles too, you said?
It's on tiles. It's seen on tiles. It's not seen on painting.
Where are those? Is it like Takiye Maven ul Mulk or?
I'm not sure if I'm taking Marvin on more, but there are some on the sort of the Edinburgh Museum, the tiles by Ali
Okay.
Muhammad and the V&A.
Okay.
And I have that specific publication. I
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for your talk. Actually, I'm curious to know about Jules Richard. You mentioned Shahryar Adl. He says that Jules Richard introduced photography to Iran in the 1840s and took photographs of the, at least introduced to the Qajar court, took photographs of the royal family that are lost. And Kamal al-Mulk later used those photographs as models for some of his paintings. So, do you believe his argument?
I'm not a specialist of Qajar period photography, so I can't speak to that.
Because you mentioned Shahryar Adl.
Yeah, because he has done. He looked at this family in particular.
We have a couple of online questions.
There is one here
sorry.
too, right behind
Yes,
you.
please. Go ahead.
Thank you for the amazing talk. I am really interested in the idea of the binary between surat and mani, or the face and meaning of the sense. And interestingly, the painter brings this kind of idea or notion to the painting by the poem by Maulana, and you, interestingly, are using it as like frame to frame your argument, as I understand it. My question is that, do you know of any cases or other examples of using this idea in the contemporary discourse in late Safavid or early Qajar period, used by contemporary painters or critics to evaluate the paintings or the works of art based on this idea?
No, it's a good question, but I don't know of any critical writing about the art of painting at this time that would bring this sort of discussion to the fore. The only thing I can recommend is careful, close reading of Nizami and Priscilla Soucek's article to begin with. There's an article by David Roxborough on portraiture, and then there Sadeghi Beg, and this sort of thinking about it. But you have to tease it out. No one comes out and says, this is better than that.
Yeah, they didn't judge the actual works of art based on this.
No, even in the context of Jahangir, the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, who actually puts numbers on works of art to make a judgment of this is this and that is that by numbering them. It's meant not in terms of aesthetic judgment as much as in terms of how much is it worth. So based on the numbers, they would pay the painter.
Very modern notion.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a related question. Can we compare it with the, in calligraphy, with the notion of shan and safa, which is the highest points that a calligrapher can reach in calligraphy, and they kind of look at the works of calligraphy and try to kind of evaluate them or assess them based on this.
There's so much more on calligraphy, clearly, than on painting. So my suggestion is to look at them again in a comparative manner, especially given the theory of two qalams.
There are a lot of 19th century munazares,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering whether there is a munazare naqash or akkas.
That would be good.
that would be-
If you know of one, tell me.
I just Googled, and there is a number of naqash or akkas sort of guftugu, but it's sort of one person reflecting on the two. But the online question from Hamid Yusuf.
Excuse me. Is that one that reflects on it? Is it
There are a
of
number
this
of
period?
Yeah, it's.
Give me the reference.
I'll send.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Hamid Yusufi, question for Professor Babaie. Do you have any theory about the cropped out texts in the bottom corner of the painting by Tabrizi?
Right.
Is it possible that the poems originally belonged to a different composition, later collaged into the current album page?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Album pages are always with that kind of doubt embedded in them because they have been cut and pasted. The one on the lower left is probably there was an empty spot that whoever composes the page is trying to create a full page after all. The ones on the top are flowers and some bits and pieces of paper. You never threw away paper. So yes, there is a chance that the whole addition of the lines are not at the same time as the painters. My argument, and I have made this argument before, that you must look at them together because at some point they were put together that way. And there are a number of examples. There is one very nice drawing, two pieces of drawings attributed to Reza Abbasi in the Metropolitan Museum. And they were put on an album page. And then somebody has put these together. One side is an old man, the other side is a young man. And it looks like the old man is pursuing the young man. And then on top, somebody has actually commissioned a line, خط سبزت که آیه خوبی است. It's about the young boy and the green, new green mustache growth at the back of his, up above his lips. You cannot prove that these paintings were done at the same time as that and all of them. But once it is put together, you must think that they meant it.
Or is it tafsir?
It's a tafsir. Yeah.
Also, question from...
I'm sorry for saying one more thing. Because of the content of the painting and the content and references of the poems, as I said, it's a high probability that they come together in the same general time period. That's all I can say that, otherwise, maybe, someone like Mujan would have said, well, if you test the, the paper and the glue and all of that and see if those are of the same, it's a good point, but I can't.
Don't put it in there. Don't make it part of the book because we want to read this soon. Okay. Next question from Nasiba Beymetova. I am not sure what is the difference, but a photographer in modern Persian is akkos, in Tajik suratgar, and shabih and shabahat dashtan refers to likeliness of two persons or things.
Mm-hmm.
I think a painter could be both a suratgar and a naqash.
Sure, if you wish to read it that way in context. So if it's a Tajik version, a Tajik usage, then you have to look at it in the context of Tajik usage of the terms and the textual material that are available in Tajik. So I'm not looking at this outside of its context. It has to be, that's historicity, new historicity of Greenblatt that I still adhere to.
Very good.
Thank you very much for your answer and for your fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Nasiba. You got...
She got
this,
muted.
what happened?
The sound got muted.
Nasiba, please.
It comes from this contraption here.
Yeah, but this just is the...
Me?
Yes, please. Could you start from the beginning?
Thank you. Yes, thank you for fascinating lecture. I thought about difference. Surat gir means surat giriftan, and naqsh kash means naqsh kashidan.
Yeah.
So there is two different verbs which may be embedded in actual action of a painter and a photographer. Because someone said that photography is more documental, has a more documental nature, and a painting has more artistically nature.
Right.
So maybe it has been already embedded in a meaning of the words. Simply we don't use them. We have forgotten them, or we don't look at the earlier materials. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good. You have good direction of thinking about it. What I think, as I said before as well, what I think is important is that you look at the usage of those terms in context at the time. And I also want to say that this notion that photography is documentary is a later idea, not at the time. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Zainab Vesali has a question along this line. Zainab, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Please. Hello.
Maybe she can't. Why don't you read it?
I can't read it. Thank you for the beautiful topic. Is this Qajar painting where the poet stands beside his patron as the latter's image is captured by the camera? Are we witnessing a search for self-knowledge or merely an illusion of it? If, as Rumi asks, what is the mirror for except that everyone may know who he is and what he is, then how does the poet's inclusion within the scene complicate this reflection? Does the poet, who traditionally mediates between image and meaning, remind us that artistic creation like photography can either purify vision or multiply illusions? And in this moment of encounter between the poet, the sitter, and the camera, is the painting itself proposing that the new technology of vision has become the modern mirror through which the self seeks to know its own essence?
Very interesting, complex, and logocentric question, I must say. Poet inclined. So one thing to remember is the poet is not encountering the painter. It's the painter who is making, together with whoever organizes this page, that makes that decision. Your point about, what was the last part of the question? The very last piece of the question.
Okay.
A thing about vision was.
Is the painting itself proposing that the new technology of vision has become the modern mirror through which the self seeks to know its own essence?
Very lovely ideas. I think that's something that the painting does not necessarily lead us to. So I would encourage you to pursue the matter, but as long as you keep a very firm footing in what the visual offers.
Very good. Thank you much.
Go ahead.
Thank you for this wonderful slide. I was thinking about the painting in terms of how the painter has approached perspective, because I can see a difference between, especially focusing on flooring. I see it kind of different between the lower level, which seems like isometric drawing, depiction of the free flooring, and the upper level, there's obviously a vanishing point. So, and you mentioned about the text, the inscription on the foreground. So, I'm considering that maybe the lower level is kind of more faithful to classical Persian painting in terms of avoiding using perspective, but the upper level is somehow different from that.
So the observation is indeed important and accurate. The trouble is that perspectival renditions do exist from earlier periods, from as early as the time of Behzad, but most importantly, things from late 17th century Safavid material. So if that is an indication, the thing that here might be worth looking at, though the perspectival rendition is not all correct, you can tell. It's kind of flattened and patched together. The only thing is that it actually makes me think, now that we are talking about it, that the ground floor, which you say is not perspectivally correct, is in fact the real space. And the upper level, which has that patchwork feeling, is an imaginary space or a place beyond the real. But perspectival renditions are found in paintings for more than 100 years at this point. I don't know if you have something else in mind.
Actually, I was assuming perspectival rendition was not dominant. Maybe
dominant
you are
is
talking about some exceptions.
No, there is plenty of it.
With a vanishing point, you mean exactly?
You don't need to have this. This doesn't have it correctly either.
Yeah.
An evocation of perspective does exist. A lot of it, not an exception.
One last...
Look at Muhammad Zaman works, for instance.
One last quick question.
So connected to what you said and also the discussions earlier. So considering this last conversation, would this be any possibilities for any metaphoric or sarcastic message in this, especially that setting of the front of the...
So I thought that I did offer some of those.
Sorry, I missed that.
I mean, this whole thing, I was often thinking, have I lost everyone in this by twisting and turning this around? That is, I mean, I'm not looking at this, that this is an artifice. The artist knows that. No artist in Persian painting tradition tries to create an image that is like a window onto something. That's a European problem. We don't have that problem.
Yes. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Sussan. This was wonderful and thought-evoking, and we're all going to remember this painting and this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope you will join us on the November 4th for the 4th lecture in the series. And it is by Huda Nadayfar, and it's summoning the documentary image. So it will be a shift towards the documentary image. Thank you so much, Sussan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your, if I may, just thank you everyone for your questions and provoking some new thoughts. I really appreciate that.